Is Thursday, November the 14th, and I'm sure that folks up there in the Northeast, where Lee Newton Rhodes is, are glad. And this came down yesterday that after a 2 week manhunt, they finally captured that convicted murderer that was on the run for nearly 2 weeks. And apparently, they were using, we were talking about technology yesterday, they were using heat seeking technology as well as the police dogs. And that is how they got him and all along those lines. So I do know that folks up there in the Northeast might be breathing a little bit easier and all in that space. So that is one of the things that I saw that was in the news from a national perspective and all along those lines. And definitely there is a retirement announcement from Mitt Romney that was bringing well wishes from a variety of people, but apparently not from Mr. Trump. Mitt Romney has announced he won't seek re-election as he calls for a new generation of leaders. So he's actually asking for some new folks to step up and all in that space. So we'll be interested to see how that plays out and what goes on in the sense of the White House run, but also in the sense of others trying to push for younger leaders and all in that space. Hey, maybe they've been listening to Pod TV because we've been talking about that a couple of times as well as something that we needed was some younger voices in the whole political realm and all along those ways. So we'll see. Maybe they've been listening and all in that kind of way. But it'll be interesting to see what my panelists have to say about Mitt Romney stepping down and looking like he's going to try to find us some young leaders, at least in his part of the United States and all along those lines. Definitely, it looks like I heard a comment that President Biden was not worried about the impeachment proceedings, and all along those lines, he said that he had something like business to do and things in that space. I think I heard something similar from Mr. Trump when he was going through the impeachment hearings as well. But it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out on the um, political front. I said that the folks in the Northeast were glad about the convicted murderer being caught. Don't know that they're all that glad about Hurricane Lee. And I do know that I have Lee Newton Rhodes with me. And, maybe it's named after the last name, maybe it's named after the first name. But I know we were joking recently that it is definitely got a name there that maybe we want to claim it, maybe we don't. It depends on what it does. But it has been lashing Bermuda before striking coastal New England and Atlantic Canada. So that is where it is heading. And all along those lines, as a matter of fact, there was a tragedy in one sense that a 72-year-old Florida surfer lost his life as Hurricane Lee pushed a potential 100-foot wave toward the eastern seaboard. And that does seem like that would be a big wave and all in that space. And Matthew Getz is in the news again as he is saying McCarthy is lying in response to accusations that he's colluding with Swalwell. So we'll see how this all plays out. And I think that is part of the conversations around some of the impeachment and other things as well. And we were talking about how sometimes your past can come up and bite you in that space, but it looks like this could be something going on in another impeachment trial because it is said that an ex-lover is intended to take the fifth in Ken Paxton's impeachment trial. So in this case, maybe they won't be as much of a fallback and all along those lines, but we'll see how that plays out as well because the Texas Attorney General's mistress has been excused from testifying in that particular impeachment trial. An FBI agent involved in Hunter Biden probe does not believe politics were involved. So he's saying that it wasn't political. I know that on this show we've had some folks that are wondering about the nature of the FBI and whether it has been politicized. And I definitely felt it was politicized when I was a youngster in the 60s, and hearing all the tales from my parents and others about what was going on in the civil rights struggles and all in that space. And that was only one of the things that was going on in that time. I'm sure those that were involved in the Vietnam struggle, as well as those that were environmentalists and a number of others, might say that it's been politicized for a while. We might even go back to seeing things like some of our great criminals getting caught and all in that space, but not caught based on the crimes that they did, but caught over tax records. So in that case, it might have been the IRS that was politicized, because I know that there was a couple of famous cases where folks were arrested not because of the crimes, but because they caught them on tax charges and things along those lines. Because I'm thinking that there's at least one or two that were in that case. I think Al Capone might have been one of them. And I'm sure that folks, when they come on, they will either remember that I am correct or they will correct me. But definitely we'll see, that I do know it was a couple of those that were in the criminal lanes and all in that space. And so Seattle police officers are under investigation as there is footage showing him involved in a situation with a woman's life and all in that space. The Seattle officer was recorded joking about a woman killed by a police car. So that is something that is going on. And the mayor there has issued an apology to the family of the woman whose death was mocked by the Seattle police officer. So that is something else that we are seeing as well. And we've talked about a number of times things around the migration issues as well. And federal judge again declares that DACA is illegal. So the federal judge has ruled against DACA. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out in the sense of what's going on politically. And a Georgia DA is proposing to try Donald Trump and 18 co-defendants on October 23rd, despite Trump's opposition and all in that space. So we're going to see whether that goes on and how that goes on and what happens in this particular trial. And speaking of trials, Bryan Kohberger, who was charged in the slaying of 4 Idaho college students, wants the cameras out of the courtroom. So that is something that he is trying to get going on. So there are some hearings today to determine the limitations on the media in the run-up to the trial. And speaking of things like that and gun issues and all along those lines, I do know that there was another incident that was going on in UNC, the University of North Carolina. She have a second cousin that is working there, so I called and checked on her, and she was actually working from home. But yeah, they were on lockdown again because of another incident, and I want to say evening classes were canceled and all in that space. So that is the second one in less than a month. So there is definitely incidences of folks dealing with guns even on the campuses. As a matter of fact, there was a armed and dangerous person, which once again sparked lockdowns, and that is what I was referring to and all in that space. And the judge has temporarily halted New Mexico governor's plan on gun restrictions in Albuquerque. So that is something else that is happening here on a national front. Now, to get to some world things, then I'll bring up my guest and everything. There is, well, not guest, but the regular panelists. There is a massive flooding in eastern Libya, which has claimed over 8,000 lives. And that is something that is going on. Some people may be wondering if the death toll will be rising and all in that way. And there is no sign of Kim Jong-un on his Russian travels, as Seoul expresses concern over the meeting with Putin. So that is something else that was going on. So I know that they were trying to have conversations between the two of them in the sense of how Putin may use this in terms of trying to get equipment and get weapons and all in that space from the Chinese nation and all along those lines. But we'll see what folks have to say about that. And it looks like Ukraine has attacked a shipyard in Russia-controlled Crimea with cruise missiles. So that is something that was being reported actually out of Moscow. So that is something that is going on. And apparently Ukraine's attack on Sevastopol also was targeting important ships that were crossing the Black Sea. So we did see that that was taking place as well. And guess what? There is a cruise ship that is stuck in Greenland with over 200 passengers and crew aboard. So that is something else that is going on, and it looks like it's actually been freed now after running aground in Greenland Fjord. So that is something else that I saw in the news and all along those lines. So that is definitely something that folks may be wanting to talk about, is some of the things that are going on in that part as well. And IMF and the World Bank meetings are planning to go ahead despite what happened in Morocco. So those meetings were taking place in that part of the world, and it looks like they are still going to take place as well. And it looks like there is a deadly virus coming out of India. So Indian authorities are rushing to contain a deadly Nipah virus outbreak in Kerala. So definitely Nipah trackers are getting samples from bats and trees, as 800 were tested in that part of the world. So we're going to see if this is something else that might be spreading as well, this time from India and all along those lines. And if you wonder what China's doing in the military, they're conducting major military exercises in the Western Pacific. So Chinese aircraft carriers and warships are massing for major exercises near the Philippines, which we know is a U.S. ally and all in that space. And on the flip side from China, Taiwan is slamming Elon Musk, saying it's not for sale, nor is it part of China. So that is something that is going on. So maybe Elon Musk is thinking that he wants to buy that part of the world, but I don't know why they would be making those comments. But if folks have any idea and they want to share with me these thoughts, because Elon Musk is very rich, so maybe he's thinking he can buy a country. I remember there was a young lady, I think it was a movie star, that bought part of South Carolina. So maybe folks are going to start trying to buy countries as well. But I'm trying to remember which movie star that was, but I do know she bought, I believe it was a city in that area, and I don't know if she still owns it or not. But the son of Aung San Suu Kyi is worried about her health in detention and about Myanmar's violent crisis. So that is what ousted Myanmar leader Soli Kyi Sun said in some comments that were made as well. So apparently she's concerned about her country, but also concerned about her own health as well. And speaking of migrants, and then, like I said, I'll get to my folks and everything. Apparently, there's an Italian migrant crisis. I think we've got a couple of panelists from the past that were from Italy. So maybe we'll reach out to them and see if they want to come on and talk about that, because there are nearly 7,000 migrants that have arrived in Italy in just over 24 hours. So Lambed USA, or Lampedusa, it was hit with a record migrant arrival. So definitely it looks like a lot of folks headed to that particular Italian island, and we'll see how they deal with it, just like we see how we deal with our migrants and all along those lines. And for those that are wondering about climate change, Earth is outside the safe operating space for humanity, according to scientists. So definitely humanity is deep in the danger zone of planetary boundaries, according to what some scientists are saying, and conditions on Earth may be moving outside that safe space. So what a safe space is for Earth and us folks here on Earth. You know, if you watch science fiction, we used to be called Earthlings and all along those lines. Who the heck knows? But we'll find out, and all along those lines. So I'm going to bring Lee Newton Rhodes in, bring in Debbie Peterson, bring in a number of other folks as well. I know that Lee Newton Rhodes is very glad to hear that they caught that convict. I'm not sure that he's glad about the storm and all along those lines, but it'll be interesting to say what he's got to say about those two stories. And like I said, guns, which we've talked about before, was very much in the news as well, because where me and Jatovia are, there was another lockdown on a campus and everything. So, Lee, I'll turn it over to you. Any thoughts about some of these news stories that I ran off and all along those lines, or just in general? But I do know you're in the Northeast.
Yeah, it was very interesting. You brought up the case of that criminal, this escapee, how they caught him, with thermal heat seeking and also the dog. It's amazing the technology we have today.
Yeah. Very amazing. It's definitely very amazing to have that kind of technology that is able to catch them, because apparently they had the heat signal. I think that I heard that they had to back off for a second, and then they came back and they apprehended him with the dog and everything. But yeah, definitely in that space. Jatovia, any thoughts about these lockdowns? I know we on a couple of the past shows we've talked about gun regulations, and I did know we talked about the Albuquerque case before, but definitely I know that both you and I are in what they call the Research Triangle Park, and like I said, I did call to check on my second cousin, who is definitely a member of the athletic department over there at UNC. Unfortunately, like I said, when I called my aunt to check in on her, she was at home safely and all in that space because she was literally working from home. But she was as concerned as I was because she had actually already checked in as well before I checked in with her to check in on Annika. But any thoughts about these lockdowns and this gun violence? And then I'd love to hear from Debbie as well, because I know there have been gun incidences on the West Coast also.
Yeah, the lockdown, I mean, it's scary for a lot of people. Actually, for everybody involved, even those who weren't on campus, but even those who were not on campus. I mean, it's just scary to think about. So, I mean, it's a sad reality that we can actually work towards fixing it, but it's so sad that the sad part is that we aren't working towards fixing it, and we're working towards normalizing it, and that's scary.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, normalizing what specifically? I didn't understand that part.
We're not working towards attacking the gun violence issue or the gun problem, the gun epidemic that we have. We're working towards normalizing it by not working towards it. We're working towards, hey, it's more important for me to have guns than to protect others.
In fairness, it's not just a gun problem. On all lockdowns, we recently had the lockdown of the college. I think it was in Idaho with the mass murders with the knives in the college, in the dorms or apartments off campus. It's not restricted to guns.
How about we ban guns and then just allow people to get knives? You keep bringing up that guns are a problem.
No, what I'm saying is we have a crime problem that's not restricted to guns.
No. Guns are the leading killer of young kids. Guns.
Excuse me. You look at the report. They included 18 and 19-year-olds in that report. To be fair, and 18 and 19-year-olds are gangbangers.
It doesn't matter. You keep trying to pigeonhole it so it takes away the gun.
No, I'm just saying you have to be accurate. If you're going to quote statistics, be accurate.
That's exactly what I'm saying when I'm saying that we're trying to normalize guns.
No one's trying to normalize.
Yes, that is your argument, is that we cannot do anything with guns. We should be okay. We should
be locking up criminals.
Crime. Oh, crime. Well, we know guns are a leading killer of young kids, but we will not do anything about it because for fear of, hey, you're going to take away my guns.
Hey, Jacoby and Lee, just really quickly as I'm thinking about it, because I know that Debbie's there in the California area, was a mayor of a town there at one point and all along those lines. And I was just wondering, and I know that your town was a little bit away from Hollywood and everything, but to Jacoby's point of normalizing it, haven't we been normalizing it for a long time? Because I think about the popularity, and I know that they're not popular now, of Westerns way back in the day and everything. But even now, if I watch and I think about the TV shows, a number of them are police or crime dramas, and they are very much about what is going on with the criminal element and all in that space. So I'm just wondering, I know the writers are on strike, but aren't we sometimes through the mass media, even something that Nick talks about a lot, and I know Kim brings it up, if we look at what the news media covers, the mainstream news media, whether it's your local TV station or whether it is the national TV stations, it is oftentimes the big crimes. Like we just focused a lot on Mr. Cavalcanti, who is an escaped convict, and the manhunt for him. But any news story on a news day, to Lee's point, talks about what that crime was in the area, and a lot of things get lost in the shuffle. I think that we miss a lot of stories about science innovation and everything.
I have to disagree that it's the news media that's normalizing it, in the sense that the news media needs to cover violent, or the news media is covering crimes and violence and everything else. There's a ton of media, tons of stuff that happens. We've had more mass shootings than days in the year. If we're stating that we shouldn't cover that, or that the news media is normalizing the fact that we've had more mass shootings than days in the year, guns, we've had mass shootings spike since the assault weapons ban was lifted. We have had violence spike in areas where gun regulations were lifted. We've had, if you take a look at gun violence in terms of the states with the least amount of gun regulations or the weakest gun regulations, they have the highest amount of gun violence. So we know regulations work. And the thing is, when you're saying we can't really put it on the news media, it's just that we can't put enough money behind the studies because the gun lobbies have blocked a lot of the ability to do the studies.
The whole conversation, Jatovia, is a waste of time. As long as you're being dictated by old white men that died in 1700.
Nick, we have a living, breathing constitution.
Nick froze, so we're gonna have to see.
Can I ask Jatovia a question? Jatovia, your area of expertise is video games.
Lee, what you got to do is pray to the God of the old 1700 old white men, because they're the one that's dictating your life.
Nick, the old white men we have now can change it if they wanted to, but it's old white men.
You need to get off.
Jatovia, how much is on Hollywood and video games glorifying violence, glorifying gun violence?
Have that law. There's absolutely no reason.
So change it, Nick.
Just to
Nick, change it.
Lee, two things.
Then we can talk.
You keep just to point it out.
It's a waste of
Two
time.
quick things. You said that they can just change it. Well, that takes political will. That takes people. That
I agree with you.
That is one of those things. That's not going to happen because of individuals who argue and fear monger and the amount of money that put into the campaign. So that's barely ever going to change.
From Canada, and they have strict gun law. I don't even know how Canada can survive. Sasha, don't only criminals have guns in Toronto?
And then even more so,
I don't know if Sasha feels safe there. Talk to me, Sasha. Do you feel safe here?
No, there are very strict gun laws in Canada, and people can obtain guns after going through extensive training program and psychological tests or so on. But you can get license and you can get a gun. But very seldom these guns are being used as a means of violence or anything.
And to your point,
in all year in Toronto, there will be, probably a handful of cases where the guns were used, and mostly by criminals and in some kind of vendetta style killings or whatever. But there are no mass school children killings in Toronto.
And to your question, Lee.
Oh my God, Sasha, how can you feel possibly safe there without a Second Amendment right to hold guns? Why don't you leave Canada and come to the United States, where we're obviously much safer here?
And also to your question, Lee.
The question in terms of Hollywood glorifying gun violence.
There's those same movies are overseas. Those same movies are in other countries. The same video games are overseas. Those same video games are in other countries. So to say that it's Hollywood's issue or it's Hollywood's fault, that doesn't. No,
I'm saying it's in terms of a contributing factor.
But that doesn't even pan out because, again,
So why do we have Madison Avenue advertising?
That factor is in every country.
I have another question for Sasha. Sasha, you grew up in Russia or the Ukraine, is that right?
Ukraine, yes, correct.
Did they have many guns there?
No.
Did you have much gun violence there?
No, same answer. The guns in Soviet Union at the time were illegal. You cannot legally own the gun. And if you would own a gun, you would be prosecuted once found about it. You will be prosecuted severely, probably even death by squatting squad. So it's not beneficial for anybody there to own a gun because you might as well being prosecuted and die as a result of that.
Hey, Sasha, and this is actually passing it back to Debbie with another question. We're going to get off of guns for a
I'd like to answer
it's a very
the first
important,
question as
it's a
well.
very important issue and everything. But I did have another quick question for you based on some of the items that I read and all along those lines. And one of them was that Mitt Romney, a leader in the Congress and everything is stepping down, and he is asking for a young leader to step in and all in that space. So it's one that has been in the political forefront. Do you think we'll see more people that'll be as bold as Mitt Romney and step down and also ask for younger generational leaders? Because he specifically asked that he wanted the more younger generational leaders to step in to his political party and not go with the to what Nick was saying, the old white man and everything. So he wanted some youth voice in to take over for his position. You've been in the political lanes and definitely been talking about corruption in politics in your books and everything. But is this something you think we'll see more of, whether it's on the West Coast or the East Coast or just globally?
Well, Mitt Romney is a man of intense integrity, and it gives me it encourages me greatly to see someone who has been in the business world, is obviously involved with a family that has a lot of money, and he has really strong ethics. That's always really, really encouraging to me. And they do exist. And so I think I certainly agree with him. I think what he's doing is the right thing. I think he almost always does the right thing, whether I agree with him or not. I think he does it for the right reasons, and he's exactly the kind of person we need in Congress. It was interesting. Barbara Boxer said, well, old people have to be represented. But what she didn't acknowledge is that old people are inordinately represented in Congress. And we definitely need young people to step up in all the parties. And young people and women, we should have equal representation. And to Lee's point, if you don't like something, why don't you vote it out? Well, if we had more young people and more women, we probably would make some changes to that Second Amendment. And so I'm highly in favor of what he says. I think he's doing the right thing. Whether others will is a whole other question. There's a lot of money and a lot of just personal identity tied up in being involved in politics, and it's kind of addictive once you're there.
Speaking of being addictive and everything, it's coming, and this I'd love to hear Lee's thoughts about this as well. But I think it was last week that one of the Republican presidential candidates actually made a very interesting quote. Some folks that are older, probably even those that are older than 60 or 50s, might have taken offense at it and everything. But I think it was Nikki Haley that actually said that the Congress is probably one of the most well-funded nursing homes that exist, and all along those lines, because of the nature of who is in there and the age range and all in that space. And I'm paraphrasing her, so that might not be the exact quote, but that was the essence of what she was saying and all along those lines. But I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts about that, because that is something she said, I want to say it was the latter part of last week.
Well, she said it was mean to say that, and I suppose you could argue it is mean, but it was the truth. And she was making a point about, she really wasn't talking so much about Congress as she was talking about aging in place and the issues involved with aging. And so I think her interview was a little bit out of context for what they actually wanted to talk about. I did want to go back to the normalization of deviation is what it's called. And it's sort of that argument, when good men do nothing, the bad men win. And if we don't stop bad things as they occur, if we don't address them and deal with them aggressively, then they continue to happen and they snowball and they get worse and worse and worse. And I do think, obviously, I think Jacoby has a point on that. And I think that's what he's talking about. Normalization, things become normalized when we don't address them or do anything about them. And that's why the Challenger exploded. They started accepting things that they shouldn't have accepted, and before you know it, blew up. And the other thing I wanted to go to was the other thing that happens is the old argument that when you're in business, you don't put temptation in front of people. If you don't want corruption in your business, if you don't want people stealing from you, you don't leave money lying around. You don't make it easy for them to take from you. And so if we're in a situation where we make it easy for people to have guns, then we leave the door open for the bad ones or for the good ones who are going to make mistakes and shoot their kids, or their kids are going to shoot one another. And I think going back to Pennsylvania, one of the things that we saw is that people just had guns well, one individual had guns lying around, and we talked about that the other day. It's incredibly irresponsible. The kid next door could come over, grab that rifle, grab that ammunition, and kill his brother accidentally, or himself on purpose in a suicide mission. So I think that we really need to get stricter about responsibility around gun ownership, because one of the biggest problems is that people simply don't lock their guns up. And I know that sometimes you want one at your bedside table, and again, you have to think about who else might get it and what are the odds that you're going to use it or someone who shouldn't use it. And then going back to the whole situation again in Pennsylvania, I was really pleased to see that the DA had that heat-seeking technology. I love that message that comes out that says, if you are a drug dealer, if you are part of a cabal, if you are part of one of the cartels, we're going to find you, because we've got our planes and we've got heat seekers and we're going to get you. And I really like that message. And I also, I really kind of course, this comes from the TV shows, but possibly, I kind of expected those guys to shoot Donnell. He certainly had it coming, I would say. And they treated him incredibly respectfully and kindly, and at the same time protected themselves. And I think that was a very good PR thing for the police, and for all the armed people who protect us. I think they did very, very well there, and I was really impressed with how gently they handled him. The fact that they de-escalated, that they did not treat him roughly, and he deserved to be treated roughly. But they did very well.
I definitely agree with you on that. And everything.
I was going to say, Debbie, what you touched on right there was very important for everything that was going on, the treatment. And I think, what you said was spot on. It is very important because of exactly everything you said, plus every movement that's been going on. That's what that fight has been about. And hopefully that leads down the line, because the whole BLM movement was based on that. And so hopefully this leads steps down the way. Yes, it's just one thing. It's not going to change everything, but that one seed can grow into a tree, and that's what we need.
Yeah, and it shows that it can be done and that it is being done. And, the level of training there was fabulous. The one criticism that I was seeing on CNN last night was really the only criticism, because it's very difficult, obviously, to find someone in those circumstances, was that maybe they set expectations too high. They said, we're going to find him, we're going to do a perimeter around him, we're going to get this guy. And people expected a quick end to a very difficult problem. So that may have been their only failing. But as far as their training in terms of tactical work and dealing with the criminal at the time, I thought they did a great job.
Debbie?
Yep.
Do we need more canine units within the city police department?
A lot of police departments have them. Even our little police department, we had 19 officers when I was the mayor. We had a canine, and our county, our sheriff's department had 1 or 2 or 3 even, perhaps. And I don't actually know. I think that is a question that we need to ask of the people who are using the canines. Whether they need more. And if they do, then yeah, we definitely would want to equip them the way they need to be equipped to do their job well.
Hey, Sasha.
There was an interesting case recently. I'm sorry, Mark, but a canine unit, a cop pulled over a car on a highway, and they brought the dog there, and the dog started sniffing towards the window. And people say, well, that's unreasonable search and seizure because the dog touched the car. Why were they doing that? Officers weren't doing that.
That's actually a Nick question, because I remember mentioning that, and I remember that's actually going to the Supreme Court, what you're talking about, because there is some fear that the dog somehow overstepped his boundaries and all in that space. So I think that is one of the cases that the Supreme Court is getting ready to look at. So, Nick, have you been hearing about this trial, and what is the verdict going to be? Because like I said, the dog was coming, as Lee said, and apparently put its paws on there and was trying to find a item and all along those lines. But what was
it? Smelled drugs.
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
That's a good question, Mark. Okay, question mark. Get it? Okay, so the thing is, it'll be up to the opinion of the Supreme Court, which is what they are. There's opinions, and of course it changes because we have changes, obviously, who's represented in the Supreme Court. But just as a caveat, when I started law practice, now going back 40 years plus, one thing our law firm decided not to do is do two areas of law: divorce, because it's messy, and there was a theory that you became what your clients were. And number two was criminal law. So we said, we're not going to handle criminal law because then you have to deal with criminals. Instead, we did estate planning. So we dealt with rich people. And we did a lot of property transactions, which were the same thing. You're dealing with a different class of people. So, Mark, basically I stayed away from criminal law. So other than reading about it. Now, why am I so against the Second Amendment issues? Well, Debbie, I was one of those guys that had guns laying around. I had several 22 semi-automatics, a 44 semi-automatic, which was very impressive, 357, which was a nice gun, nice big bullets, and a couple of guns like shotguns, all laying around in our house up in northwest Hillsborough County. Now, this goes back around 50 years ago. So we were out shooting the country, and it was the country. Today, you don't want to have any of those guns for two reasons. Number one, I brought my friends over, and I noticed that I know how to handle guns. None of them knew how to handle a gun. Not one of them. They all thought they did, but they had not one clue how to handle a gun. Number two, the area of Florida, it's just too dense. Too many chances to have an accident. So basically, we tubed all the guns. Now, why do we have to get rid of the Second Amendment? For the same reason. That took place several hundred years ago. And today, we're being handcuffed by a group of old white slave owner people who wrote a constitution that a lot of people believe was directed by God, that came down from heaven, and it didn't. They wrote a document that was good for their times, but is not good today. And so even having a discussion in the United States of America is a waste of time until we get rid of the Second Amendment and just replace it with rational laws like they have in Canada.
Nick, are you saying the Constitution is not good today, or the Second Amendment? It sounded like you said the Constitution.
Hey, Lee, unfortunately, there's a lot of parts of the Second Amendment, the Constitution, are not good today. That's one of them. The other thing that Dave
aren't there tools to change that, though?
We need to add a fiscal responsibility amendment, because those people in Washington, D.C., those politicians are drunk on power. They won't leave their positions, and drunk on spending. They'll spend every dime they get a hold of. Hence, our government is $31 trillion in debt. The biggest budget item that will take place in the next couple of decades will be paying interest on the debt, which we get nothing. And Nikki Haley brought out something correct. Social Security and Medicare are going broke during your lifetime. Like, everybody here should be alive when you find out there is no Social Security and there is no Medicare, except Sasha in Canada. And the thing is, that issue, she brings it forward to the national debate, and everybody runs for the hills. Oh, we got to protect Social Security. Look, you're not even doing what it takes to protect Social Security. Number one, as you know, Lee, you got to lift the cap. They did it on Medicare. You got to do it on Social Security.
Why is there a cap?
Remember, the only way you're going to increase your budget, there's only two ways. You know, Debbie, you've been in politics. Only two ways you can to help your financial responsibilities out. One, increase your revenue. Two, decrease your expenses. Or three, do both.
Amen.
All of them are unpopular, but that's what you have to do if you're going to have Social Security and Medicare to be solvent. There is no other choice. You got to increase your revenue by increasing taxes, decrease your expenses by not spending as much, or preferably do both. All that is unpopular. Debbie, you'll never get elected by telling people.
I know.
You'll never get elected by telling people the truth.
They do not like it.
Going down, taxes are going up, because if you don't do it, you will be broke like Greece, Spain, Japan, and frankly, the United States.
Many other countries as well. Nick, just really quickly, I had a question for Sasha.
That's
that I was amazing when somebody mentioned the canines and everything, but I know that there was historically, and I don't know if they still exist. I was actually watching, ironically, a TV show about New York City. It was one of those crime dramas and everything, and they were talking about think it was Blue Bloods. They're talking about the horses because apparently the horses still exist in New York, in parts of New York and everything. But are there mounted patrols in Canada still? And is that part of the reason for there being a little bit of protection? Are the mounted patrols effective, or is that something that's not going on? Maybe in Toronto, which is a big city, they don't still have mounted patrols. But are there mounted patrols throughout Canada the way that we have historically heard there used to be?
RCMP, which stands for our police force, is reasonably strong and controls pretty well all the territory. Somehow, when something happens, they are there almost instantly. I don't know how they do it, but let's see, if I'm speeding, for example, they are immediately there to stop me. How I never seen them there before, and that was not announced on public radio that there is a trap, but they're there. And once I was trying to run away from them, and I had a pretty good car at the time, and I drove by little small streets are there, and I looked around and they're not there, and I said, "Oh, how well I did." A second later, they arrived, and actually, they were nice to me and let me go. I told them that I was going to the airport and I still had to do a lot of things and so on. And they just said, drive carefully and so on, let me go. That's a good thing about it. Other than that, I think that the police is well-funded, well-functioning. And it seems to me in North America, it's one of the best police forces, really, for what it is.
Amazing and everything. Hey, Debbie, just really quickly, because I was just thinking about something else that we were talking about, or at least I brought up in the news, and it's definitely something that is very big in California and big in Texas and everything. But what is your thoughts about this latest ruling around DACA? Because definitely we've talked before about migrants, and DACA has now been ruled illegal once again and everything. But is this going to open the floodgates of sending the kids back, or how is this going to play out in California? And what are your thoughts around that? Because it's definitely something that a lot of folks were concerned about it. And know even here in North Carolina, there were a lot of immigrants that were under the DACA qualifications, which is some of the younger immigrants and all in that space. But what is your thoughts about how this is going to play out, and should it have been ruled illegal?
I haven't read the legal arguments, but all I can say is many of these DACA kids are hardworking students who are contributing. And in our high school, it was in the top 2% in the United States. And we're a small little country county with 275,000 people in the middle of nowhere in California. And top 2% of high schools, and a good chunk of our kids were kids who came in with English as a second language. And we probably had more people going to Cal Berkeley, and Cal Berkeley at one point was the number one, not just number one public, but the number one university in the world. And so, and a number of their kids would have been DACA kids. And so I think that we're making a mistake to criminalize these kids or even to toss them out. I think we have to find a way to make them, let's make them legal. Let's just say you've been here, you're contributing, you get to stay.
I'm sorry, Debbie, for our listeners' advantage, can we define what DACA kids are?
Yeah, that would be really helpful to me as well, because I don't have a definition. My understanding is that DACA kids are kids who were born here to illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants.
I don't believe they were born here. I think they were brought here as children.
Sorry, what was that?
If they were born here, they would be Americans.
Yeah, they would be.
So these are not Americans that we're talking about.
I just went to one of the immigration web pages, and I'll give you their definition. A dreamer, which is actually part of DACA, is an undocumented immigrant who came to the United States as a child. So dreamers often have only known the U.S. as a home and identify as Americans. There are as many as 3.6 million dreamers residing in the United States, many of whom either did apply for DACA or aged into the program after it stopped accepting new applicants. So you are correct in thinking that they were born elsewhere, but they have spent the vast majority of their life here in the United States or in America.
Thank you.
No problem.
So if they're
Nick,
contributing,
you're muted again, Nick.
paying taxes, let's just say, okay, kiddos, you came here with someone else. It wasn't your choice. And let's keep them. They're helping us. They're good.
But for some reason, Congress doesn't want to do that. That baffles me.
Congress has their heads up their rear, so we don't care about what they say. When I was studying law at Oxford University at St. Edmund's Hall, one thing we studied was the statute of limitations, which exist for every crime except murder, rape, and then that's about it. So, like, if you committed assault, you committed a burglary, you committed theft, after 3 to 5 years, you can go say, hey, yeah, I did rob that station, that gas station 5 years ago. And they can't, you admit it, and they can't put you in jail. All right, the statute of limitations goes all the way back through British common law. Here's the problem. It doesn't exist in our immigration law, which is bad. And that's part of the reason we're seeing this problem that we have right now in immigration. If we were to have a statute of limitations for our immigration law, it would put to rest a lot of the craziness that exists around our immigration policies in the United States. So somebody, yeah, they got here illegally. So what? You know, it doesn't matter. If Lee 5 years ago robbed a bank, and he goes, well, yeah, I robbed the bank 5 years ago and took off with hundreds of thousands of dollars. Statute of limitations expires. You get to keep the money. It's really weird, but it's been in British common law.
Nick,
apply it to immigration to solve a lot of problems.
If I robbed the bank 5 years ago, I robbed the bank 5 years ago. If I came here illegally, every day I'm here, am I not here illegally?
No, because you're the date. See, this is how you define the statute of limitations. The law was broken once you cross the border. Then afterwards, it's not. It's like saying, well, I robbed the bank 5 years ago, but I kept the money. So
you're saying being in America illegally is not a crime? Just crossing, getting here.
You do not what they call toll the statute of limitations. Right after the crime was committed, the statute starts running. And then after 5 years, your sins are forgiven. And that was the whole theory of the statute of limitations. So if you have some immigrant, if I got an immigrant working on the golf course, which I live on right across the 15th hole, they're there all the time, and they've been here 5 years, they pay their taxes, they go to work, they've committed no crime, all they do is work. You're going to say, oh, you committed a crime because you entered illegally 5 years ago. Give me a break. You know, and the thing is, because the United States is a country of immigrants, except for my family that came here in 1665 and greeted everybody here before it became a country. You know, I mean, but most people, the United States is based on that. Or here's the other thing you do, Lee. Remember that thing you have, the Statute of Liberty? It says, bring it, you're poor, you're tired, you're homeless. Forget it, you're hungry. Forget it. Just say that's all a lie. And take the Statute of Liberty, send it back to France, and say we don't believe in any of that junk. Because that's really the U.S. stance to that.
Well, Ellis Island didn't take it everybody. If you were sick, they turned you around.
Liberty and send it away.
Just tell me you had a point you wanted to make as well.
Yeah, this is actually really cool. This is actually a really interesting debate, and if it epitomizes the problem that we're having, especially around immigration and a lot of other things. It's all about the terminologies and the ways we view it. Lee, you said that aren't they illegal? Well, you tried to point out, okay, well, aren't they?
I'm trying to distinguish between entering being a crime and being here illegally a crime. Well, just like kidnapping. To kidnap somebody, every day you're kidnapping him, you're committing a crime.
I get that. But what I'm trying to point out is that messaging and that thought. So what Nick is pointing out about the crime happened on crossing the border. They're not committing a crime ever since. If we were to think, if the society itself, or if we put out that messaging, how in our society we're thinking in that mindset that, okay, with the statute of limitations or the statute of limitations and the idea that they're not breaking any laws, just living or being here, and they're not illegal, and they're just undocumented because what they did when they crossed over the line at that one time. if we had a mindset and we're thinking of them or thinking of those individuals that cross the border illegally but are now undocumented and had a different viewpoint, and they're not these individuals who are others and they're not the boogeyman, how would our society help them in that fashion? Because there are individuals.
Yeah, Jacoby, 2 points. First of all, we got on this because of DACA. This has nothing to do with DACA, because DACA kids did not come here illegally. They came here, I believe, through some special program, which we're finding out now was not legal, but at the time when Obama made DACA program, they came here under that program legally. That's my understanding.
If you remember the definition that I gave, they came through with their parents who were actually.
No, I understand that. They didn't. They crossed the border.
Right.
They didn't hide in the night. They didn't sneak in.
But even that terminology that you're saying right there, you're creating individuals who come here, who yes, they may have crossed illegally and they're now undocumented.
Right.
They aren't hiding in the night. They aren't hiding in the shadows and trying to come after you. But that terminology within itself is demonizing these individuals who are working here legally, who are doing things the right way. Because actually, if you look at the statistics themselves, those illegal or undocumented workers or undocumented individuals commit less crimes on a percentage basis compared to the actual citizens themselves. So if we
hear what Sasha has to say.
Of them as boogeymen hiding in the night, illegal individuals who are breaking laws.
What term would you want to use for people who come here illegally?
But if we can think
Toby,
of those individuals,
I hear your point. How would you refer to people who come here illegally? Was there a term? I'm sorry?
Undocumented individuals.
Okay, many countries, including Canada and probably US as well, they have a terminology so-called the business immigration. So they allow people who establish business at different countries have different amounts, say $250,000 or sometimes $500,000 or whatever. So they are getting immediately the residence and in some time full citizenship. Okay, it's the first concept. Second concept is that there is a crime, there is a punishment. Okay, so these people committed a crime by entering United States illegally. That's fine, that's a crime. Now, what is the punishment which will be according to the crime committed? Was it death by firing squad? Is it guillotine? Or maybe a fine of, say, I don't know, $50,000 probably would do. So if you will apply both of these concepts, you'll find out that a lot of people in all the years they were working, they were saving money, and they have, some of them, at least $50,000 cash, some others $250,000, some others much more. So if you will make possible for them, for a certain amount of money, depends on your financial situation. In some cases, they would be allowed to get financing from the local friendly bank, and they can settle this heinous crime of illegally entering a great United States of America and become just normal people by paying some money. And Uncle Sam will grab this money with vengeance, and they'll say, "Oh, 50,000, pay 75. Oh, you can't pay 75. Give me 65." Because there is a process.
You're right, Sasha. Remember, the United States is big time debt, $31 trillion in the hole right now, and with no end in sight, as we're spending money for things like internet service in the middle of nowhere. We spend money on charging stations that we shouldn't spend on, and we just spend money like a drunken sailor. So this would actually be a great idea, Sasha, because it's a way that we can collect revenue and earmark it to pay down our national debt of $31 trillion, which we have to earmark a lot of money to pay that thing down. Or
opening charging stations.
Or
more on every corner.
The United States needs to run more like a business, because right now you're running a bankrupt company. Can you imagine running a company that loses $2 trillion a year?
Can't run like a business.
You've got to run it like a business. It's losing $2 trillion a year and it's
Why not?
$1 trillion in debt. Do you know, even when I was on our homeowners association board, not a mayor, but on the board, we ran a balanced budget and had 1.2 million in reserves. Okay. The United States has no reserves, 31 trillion in debt, and 2 trillion in losses. No one would buy into this country with a sane mind. So
Nick,
Our last
think about
presidents
finally
that were
going in the
business-
right direction.
And
the
you-
business-
you know,
that
if you
mantra
have to look
runs.
into-
Oh,
Go-
I'm sorry, Sasha. Go ahead.
Why don't we learn something from the history of the world? Remember, the fiercest fighters and conquerors were Mongols. So what Mongols did, they were conquering the country. They were killing all population except women and some kids. And that's it. And they would watch. Later on, they discovered that by doing that, they're getting land. But the land is useless because there is nobody's working there, nobody's producing anything. So slowly they changed their approach. Now they wanted to conquer the lands, but keep people there to live, to work, to produce something. And of course, they were taking their taxes. Or at that time, it was different than taxes, but still, they were collecting revenue from these lands. Now, that started to make a lot of sense. So now, by deporting illegal immigrants who are working and paying taxes, and in time they could become a model citizens, if not already. So you are kicking out your producing part of the population that are not on the welfare or some other state subsidies, but they are actually contributing. They're making your state wealthier. So how stupid is that? It's impossible.
Toby, you had a comment you were going to make, and I had a quick thing, and we're getting ready to wind down shortly, but it was actually based on another story that I brought up earlier as well.
So I was just going to say the last few businessmen that were presidents were some of the worst presidents that ran up the national debt. So you had Donald Trump, 25% accrued, 25% of the debt accrued under him. Then you had the Bushes. You've also had Jimmy Carter. You've also had Truman. So businessmen who become presidents aren't good. Running the country like a business, you end up hurting people. It's more like it would be more so like a nonprofit business or a community organization is how the country should be, is how the country runs better. But also, Sasha points out investments in our society. I mean, we always cut investments in education, where education shows the biggest kickback in terms of our investments. So we don't really invest in our people. We invest in companies and do this whole rich trickle down economics, because that whole business mantra has been pushed on society since the idea coming out of Nixon with his, not only the Southern strategy, that's a whole nother topic, but also that's where the trickle down economics idea and mantra for the Republican Party kept coming from, because even Reagan pushed it and so on down the line. So yeah, if we could invest more so in our people, hitting more of that middle class and even the lower classes, we would be better off, because we could build out the middle class. And that all came from, if we want to talk about the golden era of how we built society, I mean, taxes, Nick, nobody will get elected talking about raising taxes, but the taxes have to be raised. And that's back with our golden era when the middle class and everything was built out, our tax rate was a lot higher. So running it like a business isn't going to work.
But speaking of running like a business, because I know we're getting ready to wind down, I did make that comment earlier that apparently Elon Musk was thinking that Taiwan is part of China, and definitely all along those lines, and they rebuffed him, saying that they are not part of China, and they also made it very clear that they are not for sale, because apparently maybe Elon Musk was thinking that he was going to buy Taiwan. I don't think that he actually made that statement, but I know that they were thinking of him as a business leader and the entertainer, and it actually comes to somebody that I don't think Lee knows personally, but he knows of her purchase when she was in Georgia, because it was actually Kim Basinger that bought an entire city. I think that she eventually lost that city because I think it was
It's
Brazeltown,
Brazelton, Georgia.
Georgia, and all along those lines. So maybe that's what we got to do. We have to
Mark,
have
there's
more.
rumors that Washington D.C. is for sale.
Well, that's what you're saying. Do we have to have more of the cities for sale, and do we get people to buy these cities? Because, like I said, if Kim Basinger is buying cities, if Elon
I think
Musk
Musk
is gonna
already
buy
bought
countries-
Washington D.C. Lee.
Yeah, he definitely bought a lot of those politicians.
I don't get one thing. Mark, at the beginning of the show, you mentioned that there was a wealthy woman who wanted to buy North Carolina. Is that something what you said? That's what I heard. I don't know, maybe misunderstood. So I
No,
said,
it was mentioned that there was a celebrity that, and I was trying to remember who it was, but that's why I was actually referencing what I was talking about. There was somebody that wanted to buy a city. It wasn't in North Carolina. It was Kim
it was
Basinger in
North
Georgia.
Carolina. Okay, so let's see that somebody wanted to buy a city. So who sells that? Okay, there's an offer of $25 trillion for, say, North Carolina. Okay, and then $25 trillion, I would at least think about it. But who is the seller? We know the buyer, we know the price. Who is the seller in this case?
Well, hold on a second. Lee, you were in that area. I'm thinking at Georgia at the time that it happened. Wasn't it the city itself that put itself up for
I don't
sale?
remember that, but there is talk that BlackRock is buying up a lot of residential properties across the United States.
Right, because I want to say that she invested 600,000 of her own money and everything is the article that I read. So she put up some money. She found investors that helped her buy the city because the entire city was bought for, I want to say, 20 million or something like that. But it was the city that was put up for sale, and she bought it some time back, and that was actually a big story at the time that she bought.
Didn't something similar happen in Michigan with Detroit? Because I know that was it either
When they went bankrupt?
Yeah, and they were selling off different, not only the artworks that were owned by the city, there were also, I think, buildings as well. There was just a lot of stuff that was being sold off to help because the bankruptcy of the city and the way the city was run.
Which happened because the city council was corrupt.
Yes.
And
Aren't they all?
It's an interesting concept because cities are separate municipalities and they're owned by the people in the municipalities, but the leadership can choose to sell the assets of the city, but you can't sell the rights of the people. In other words, you may buy the assets of a city, you may buy the land, you may buy buildings with the permission of the leadership of the city, which unfortunately doesn't have checks and balances when you're talking about cities. They don't have those three branches of government. They have a council that makes all the decisions. The only oversight is the people. And that's why I write books now instead of running for office. Because I want to
Speaking of which and everything, and Nick might get a kick out of this. Apparently, when she bought this city sometime back, I think it was in the late 80s and everything, she actually partnered with a pension fund. So actually partnered with a pension fund called Ameritech, which is now owned by AT&T, in order to take on nearly all of the 2,000-acre town. So she partnered with that, and like I said, it was 600,000 of her own money that she put in there. But somehow she partnered with the pension fund. So I guess the pension fund people were trying to help her get to this particular city for $20 million in her hometown and everything. So there was actually a couple articles that saying that maybe that wasn't the brightest investment decision. I know we're gonna have, and I've had investment shows regularly. We do them every Wednesday. So we got one coming. Well, we had one yesterday, and we'll have one next Wednesday as well. But I was just thinking that that's what she did, and she thought that that was going to be a tremendous investment and a tremendous windfall. I think she eventually wound up selling it, and I don't think that she made a big profit off of it. So yeah, she thought she was going to make a profit off of her.
The best business was selling a Brooklyn Bridge. That was really great proposition because you could announce that it costs, say, $2 billion and start selling shares that somebody would buy 0.5% of the Brooklyn Bridge and somebody would buy 1.5%, and so on and on and on. And when you bought it all and you sold all 100% of shares, actually you could sell as well 1,000% of shares. It doesn't matter because there is no entity from which you as a buyer could claim anything at all. So, but that was a good scheme. It worked for
that's good and everything. I know we ran it down. Hey, Nick, are you and National Pension Partners going to try to purchase the city of Durham and all along those lines? Because apparently that was a pension fund that was teaming up with Kim Basinger. So, and you're now in Durham. So I want to know if you're business partners like Max and others are going to be thinking that they want to buy Durham or Raleigh, or maybe they want to go buy Smithfield or one of the other adjacent towns. So
Well, it all depends on price. For a couple of $1,000, I could buy it.
It's all a price thing. But right now, Mark, there are 11 cities that are available for sale. But I agree with Debbie. You basically buy the assets of what they call a municipal corporation. So basically, once you move in, you're the only person there. So you become the mayor, the city councilman, et cetera. And then you get to tax yourself. I mean, it's kind of are you serious?
But Nick, remember, if the slavery would be legal, then it makes a lot of sense. You would buy city, you would buy all the slaves who are there. And that makes some sense.
There are towns for sale right now if you want. They're small little towns in the United States.
And Nick, hold on a second. Were any of those cities worth anything in terms of their having some assets or anything? Because I'm thinking that Lee and myself, I talked about the Hurricanes earlier. Maybe we'll team together and we'll create Lee wherever state it is and everything. So I need to know what.
Mark, you're talking about the Brooklyn Bridge. You put a Patolo in there. You can make a bundle.
Well, we can go look into it for our next show, Mark. I mean, the thing is, there are listings available right now if you want to buy small towns throughout the United States. A lot of them are ghost towns.
Yes,
one of the huge issues in Hawaii right now is in Lahaina, where Hawaiians are being approached by outside investors who want to buy that property because it's so incredibly valuable. So investors do want to get in and buy the land in cities and develop it.
Right.
Of course.
Yeah.
I remember there is a great Lahaina steakhouse, and I was there a few years ago. I'm still getting emails from them inviting me for dinner and so on, but lately it stopped. Probably it suffered as a result of what's happened there. But Nick, one proposition: if a group of illegal immigrants put their funds together and make an offer of one of the cities which are available for sale, would that allow them to become legal immigrants?
No, because it's federal law. See, the real problem is they have federal issues.
Well, you say that, but ironically, Nick, what he's talking about is actually to some degree happening, but it's not happening. And there are some folks that are upset about it because there are cities, including Durham, North Carolina, including some, I think, up in the Northeast, and a number of other places that are considered sanctuary cities. So there are cities that are welcome.
You don't use that word anymore, because then what will happen is Governor Abbott will send a bunch of immigrants to your city, Mark. So say, hey, we're a sanctuary city. And the next thing, he'll drop off 100,000 immigrants into your city, and you're going, oh no, we can't support them.
Well, it's interesting because foreigners can buy property. So it could certainly happen that the assets of a city could be owned by foreigners.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, they couldn't contribute to campaigns legally.
Notice she said legally, because they might do it under the table and all in that space.
We just have to change our immigration laws, put in a decent statute of limitations. And also, one of my employees was my executive secretary for 10 years. She came in legally on a green card. It took her 10 years, way too long to become a citizen. I mean, it should be a 3 to 5 year process.
And what's crazy is that the amount of money that did she have to do the $1,000, and if she missed it, then she's got to pay another $1,000.
Yeah, there's all these fees, and then the thing is, we brought some people in from actually Canada on these HB1 visas. We had to pay all these fees. It's kind of what they call in law a racket. And the thing is, you just have to get rid of this racket. I don't know who benefits from it, but immigration in the United States is a racket.
Well, we're going to get on out of here. Before we get out of here, speaking of rackets and everything, I've been trying to figure out all day long which of the characters that Jacoby is wearing on this particular day. So as I get ready to get out of here, he can tell us which character he is wearing on his T-shirt and all along those lines, because he's definitely got some tremendous entertainment value as well in that space.
Just because of our discussion yesterday about inclusion with Sasha, and he went on some crazy tirade, the drunken uncle style, I went with Sesame Street, which is one of the most inclusive groups that teaches about inclusivity, and it's one of the greatest shows you could ever watch and let kids watch, because they introduce characters who have special needs. They introduce characters in different communities from not only lower income community, the higher income community, but also in social communities, from the LGBTQIA to all communities. So one of the most welcoming groups. And guess what? Even got it at Target. So yes, that's why.
Was it full of people? Did you have to
Target
stay?
is always full of people. Great place to shop.
Really?
And frankly, if you work with them, you'll find out
20% in one day, and it's
So
still
what?
staying there.
Again,
Gosh,
that proves my point that we need to shop more there and normalize inclusivity and not the hatred of people who are toxic, that have the toxic masculinity, who are racist, who are bigoted towards these individuals. So we need to shop and normalize these places that are inclusive and welcoming to everybody, because that's who we should be.
You know, Jacoby, it's not a welcoming organization. The only reason you think it is you've been sold that river. And what really happens, because the reason our network exists is because of the horrible nature of the public broadcasting system and how they operate. The executives suck off close to $1 million a year. They allow no new entries into there. They buy all their product overseas today, or their own self-inflicted groupies. And so the thing is, and then they suck off the American public by taking money from the government. So what happens in reality?
You're describing capitalism.
I invite you to try to work with the public broadcasting system. Good luck. My thinking: shut it down. In other words, do not use government funds to subsidize millionaires that run the public broadcasting system.
So Sesame Street
are
now
not
owns Sesame Street is actually now owned by a different company. Sesame Street is now on HBO or actually Max, because they had to sell that off because PBS was getting their funding was cut.
You know, the people who we need to be happy about at Sesame Street are the writers and the producers.
Exactly.
Writers and the producers who are doing the right thing. And you'll see a lot of times on a lot of TV shows, the writers and the producers are putting on stuff that helps all of us understand things and be more open to being more inclusive.
Debbie, they do not support American programming. The PBS supports buying things through their own internal network, the American Public Television, through the British Broadcasting Company. In other words, their big thing is to actually, you have to get on what they call common carriage. That's what they call it. And you're an American program. We don't like you. We like to buy things from the BBC and then resell it. Go look at all the programming. And you know, the average viewer and contributor is a 69-year-old female. So when you try to bring younger programming, other than they throw out Sesame as your Sesame Street is like one of their outliers, they're not acceptable. You know, this is not a warm, accepting organization. I spent 2 years with these people.
I'm going to have to go, guys. I have to
just
meeting.
Appreciate you, Debbie. Everybody getting about all.
Debbie, take care.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Remember, Mark.
Yes.
Yes.
To end on more of a happy note, real quick.
Nick, you're welcome, by the way, too, at noon. Okay.
Is a chess show going on now?
There will be very important subject.
Tape at 12 o'clock.
At 12.
All right.
To end on more of a quick happy note, that's the business side that you're talking about, Nick, and that's separate from the actual show itself. And celebrating the writers and the message is the more important thing about inclusivity and what we're working towards. Same thing with X-Men and all the Marvel stuff and a lot of the comic book stuff is all about inclusivity. Honestly, that's where Stan Lee was going with the X-Men, because everybody's so diverse and everybody has, you know, not only different powers, different looks and so on and so forth. That's why X-Men was important, because it was talking about the accepting of others and their abilities, and as well as their diverse backgrounds. And so
To end on that note and everything, and I hear what you're saying.
Okay. The show itself is okay, but
now you're trying to go down a dark road.
I really resent what they did when they said, hey, we shouldn't fund the PBS, which we really shouldn't, the U.S. government. That they threw out, oh, you don't like Big Bird. In other words, it was really, really deceiving by the executives of PBS who pull down nearly $1 million a year in income.
Well, I think
to throw out Big Bird when they're sucking off the
reason-
American debt. You know,
the
you know,
reason,
I have
no,
no
actually,
respect
the
for it.
reason that got tossed out there, Nick, is because of how it was put forth. Because if you look at the argument against or the argument for pulling it down, wasn't about money. It was about actually the diversity that
Okay.
Sesame Street was
Well,
pushing.
okay, then
So
good. If
that's
it's not
why
about
that got
money,
put
then
out. So the
let's not fund it. I don't have any problem with that. Let PBS
No.
stand on their own 2 feet like
But
everybody
the
else.
argument that you're saying, oh, well, they brought out Big Bird. Well, they brought out Big Bird was because individuals said that they're trying to turn my kids gay. They're trying to make my kids do this. That was the argument, and that was the response.
Yeah.
And on that note, we're ready to get. Hold on a second. We're getting ready to go here. We can
I
have a
don't
whole
care what
discussion
they
and a whole
do,
show
but
about
not be funded
PBS
by
and
the
everything.
government.
And
Our
apparently, Nick's doing his. Jatovia
The
apparently
funding
Nick,
is a different
doing his.
issue, but
yeah.
the argument that got put out there was, hey, they're turning my kids gay. Well,
so
no,
then
they're
you're
not.
wrong.
You're attacking Big Bird.
Right.
So it was.
Well, on that
fine.
note,
Then
we
what
could have
do
a
is
whole
we just
conversation
tell
around
them,
the merits of PBS and everything. And apparently, Jatovia Nick is doing his best impersonation. It's a very good impersonation of Oscar the Grouch. So Nick is doing his impersonation of Oscar the Grouch and all of those lines. And
Give
on
me my
that note,
cookie.
we're here to
Give
get
me my
on out of
cookie,
here since
Peanuts.
he's doing his impersonation of Oscar the Grouch.
Give me my cookie.